Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A pleasure to take part in today's Queen's Speech debate, and lots to welcome, I think, in the conversation and in the announcements we've heard today. The Right Member for Islington North very nearly said something that I agreed with about schools at one stage in his speech, and I was about to stand up and say how I actually agreed with him, and then as the sentence went on, kind of ruined it, and I didn't agree anymore. But part of it, which I will come back to, I very much enjoyed and agreed with. But I'd like to welcome some elements within today's Queen's Speech. I think it's first worth identifying what the Queen's Speech is, because we've talked a lot in the Chamber today about the need for short-term intervention. Well, the Queen's Speech lays out the legislative agenda. By its very nature, it's not short-term. Legislation takes time. Inevitably, it takes a year or more in this place to get any serious piece of legislation done. We all recognise the need for short-term support and help for the most vulnerable. We all accept that, and we all see in our own constituencies. My own is one of the poorest, the most disadvantaged on many indicators in the country. We all see that hardship. We all recognise the need for support, and the Chancellor has said that overtly. The Chief Secretary has been on the media round today making clear that that will happen and more support will come. But today's Queen's Speech is about the long term and about the legislative agenda. There's a lot to welcome, as I've said, not least on the economy and on levelling up, which I'll come back to and focus on in more detail later on in my speech. But I'm pleased to see elements around, start with perhaps the relatively small in the grand scheme of levelling up and the cost of living, but football governance. I think sustainable support for our clubs, which are not just businesses but are the heart of our communities in many places. I welcome the opportunity to look at that in more detail. I welcome the opportunity to further crack down, frankly, on the mass disruption, the criminal damage that has often been allowed to masquerade as legitimate protest in recent years, which is not right or acceptable. I hugely welcome the schools bill and the opportunity to do more on school standards. This is where he's gone now, but I was nearly going to agree with the member for Islington North. He obviously didn't want to hear how we agreed, because that would only be damaging to his reputation, I'm sure, or mine, one way or the other. But he was talking about the need for more autonomy within schools, for more broader curriculum, for the opportunity to prioritise and promote cultural capital as opposed to just exams in our school system. And on that, I totally agree with him. I would like for Nottinghamshire, the council that I lead, to take forward the schools white paper as an early adopter, as an opportunity to drive that, to give schools more autonomy, to give our schools a clearer structure of accountability, to give them more of an ability to be empowered as teachers and as schools and trusts to do their own thing, to do what they think is best for their children. I think we'd retain more teachers if we empowered them to do that as well. So opportunity in that schools bill, and as I say, I hope that Nottinghamshire will be an early adopter of some of that new legislation. I want to urge caution on a couple of things as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, not least the online safety bill. I think it's well intentioned, and I think we all understand the reasons why we would want to seek to protect people online, and why things that are illegal in the real world, inverted commas, should also be illegal online. But I am also concerned about the risk of allowing big tech companies to police our language and our speech in a way that, we see the debate that rages about Twitter and about Elon Musk and all of the controversies around that. It is a really difficult topic and a really difficult thing to get right. I would just urge government not to go too far in restricting or allowing anybody, frankly, to choose to police the language that we are allowed to use, because that can only end badly, in my view. I welcomed earlier in the year the Chancellor's commitment to move towards a lower tax, small state kind of economy where we can promote growth, where we can allow the private sector to flourish and to create jobs and to support our constituents. He talked about a small state, and I would like for the government to consider perhaps putting that into practice on some other legislation too, not least things like the obesity strategy, where we're starting to talk about which adverts can be placed where in which shops. It's madness, and it's not something that the government should be involved in. So again, I hope that the government might reconsider on some of these things. But I wanted to focus the majority of my comments on the economy and on levelling up. I was pleased to see the phrase economic growth repeated over and over again. One of the most successful political campaigns of my brief career has been the long-term economic plan that we all remember and we all heard about over and over again. And that was the same kind of language that we used in those days. It proved to be very popular. It's very important My right honourable friend from Newark talks about the importance of growth in terms of being able to fund our public services, in terms of being able to have better life chances for residents in our communities. Some of the bills and legislation that we brought forward in this term is absolutely vital to that, not least the Levelling Up Bill, which will be a key driver of that growth. And it's that private sector growth, not government spending, that is the heart of better opportunities for areas like the East Midlands, where I come from, that has historically been at the bottom of all the charts in terms of both public and private sector growth, but where we have huge opportunities to get more of both. But at the very least, we already have projects in train that will allow us to free up the private sector to invest in our area, to create those better paid, better quality jobs that are in short supply in our region. That's not about high spending, it's about promoting and creating an environment for business to flourish in our region. It's about delivery, because we've talked for a long time about the funding that's going into the most disadvantaged areas. I just mentioned that the East Midlands is the lowest on all those charts about what money, private and public, goes into these places. My own constituency in Mansfield is the bottom end of that regional scale as well. But we have got things in the pipeline where we are setting these that will come forward in the future that are really positive. We've seen, whether it's capital investment, things like the Towns Fund or Levelling Up Fund, we've seen huge funding announcements. What I asked of the Prime Minister in Prime Minister's questions a few weeks ago was about delivery and outcomes, because you can only talk for so long about how much money you've secured for an area without residents being able to point to a thing that is new. A lot of what we will achieve, and a lot of what's most important in that Levelling Up agenda, is not visible, right? It's skills, it's education, it's schools, things that are long-term, and things that you're not going to be able to point to a shiny achievement within the life of one parliament. But some of it is short-term, some of it is building, some of it is regeneration of town centres, some of it is things that we've announced hundreds of millions of pounds for, getting on for 2 years ago now. And these things are bogged down in process, they're bogged down in Whitehall often. And if we're going to get to a position where residents believe us when we talk about the big things that we're doing around skills, around education, and how that's going to benefit them in the future, we need to show them the delivery of those short-term things, of that high street regeneration, of those towns funds, of that money that we have promised. It's all in the pipeline. I'm getting fed up of... I will be fair.
I just feel slightly disappointed for his constituents. When I point to things in my Bristol South constituency that were delivered by the last Labour government, every single school rebuilt, a brand new hospital, the investment that came there that those people deserved after the years under the last Tory government, that's what we delivered for them on the ground. His government has had 12 years and he still can't point to anything in his constituency.
I thank you for that intervention. I understand the point she's making, but she's not quite there, given that the Labour government was obviously 13 years ago. There's been a great amount of time for the delivery of a number of those projects. Going back to 97, I was 8 years old when that Labour government came into power. You've had a fair old while to deliver on some of those things. The government that I represent, or certainly my constituency, has been represented by the Conservatives for only 5 years in its entire history, and that's always been me. We've been working on a number of projects, and this government and this Prime Minister and this Levelling Up agenda has been a very brief period in time. We've talked already about the hundreds of millions of pounds of investment that have been secured for my own constituency. We can talk about the Towns Fund, we can talk about additional support and investment in skills, we can talk about capital investment for our college that we've not seen before, we can talk about new capital investment in our hospitals. All of that is in train. Some of it is visible, some of it is not yet visible, but the point that I'm making is that we need to be able to point to those things, not just in my constituency, but across the country. And some of those seats that we only won a matter of 2 years ago, where new talented Conservative MPs are making the case for that investment. We need to see outcomes across the board. And it's no good standing and saying we've made promises of money because residents at some stage will say, where is that new town centre building? Where is that new project? Where is my shiny new town centre? I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I well understand the concerns of people in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire as he does. But why aren't many of those people saying to him right now, why isn't the government doing something to put more money in my pocket? Because I'm sure he's hearing from his constituents, as I'm hearing from mine, that they are worried sick about paying their bills, and at the moment when they're really struggling, that's not doing anything to help those families, and it isn't doing anything to help our high streets in Nottinghamshire either.
Thank you for that intervention. She's right that constituents are worried, and they are in my constituency, they are, I'm sure, in hers. They also recognise that the government can't flick a switch and fix everything. And nor should anybody suggest that they can. So the £22 billion package of intervention that we've already brought forward, and a commitment to more in the pipeline and coming over the course of the summer and into the autumn, Chancellor's already made that commitment. But no, very few residents in my constituency come to me and expect the government to have a magic bullet. And I think it's slightly false, I have to say, that so many on the opposite benches seem to suggest that there is one when there isn't. But the final point I wanted to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm conscious of time, was around that levelling up bill in particular, which is hugely important for our region, more so perhaps than many, because it contains the mechanism for us to bring forward a devolution deal for the East Midlands, for Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Nottingham and Derby, that is the delivery mechanism for many of the things that we've talked about. A member opposite, who's no longer in a place, talks about brownfield funding, the ability to bring forward sites and to have more clout over what you do with that funding. That's part of our devolution negotiations. There were other examples that she raised, and I sat at the time thinking we can do that. If we bring forward this devolution arrangement and we crack on with this negotiation, the only thing, and the thing that will slow that down in the course of that negotiation, which should be done by the end of the year, is that legislation, which will take longer. So I would call on government to prioritise that, to bring that forward, and let's get those levers, that additional funding. If you look to the West Midlands, our partner that we often look to enviously, that's been worth billions and billions of pounds of additional investment since they got their deal just 6 or 7 years ago. We want that, and we can bring that forward quickly if government commits to bringing that legislation forward in a timely way in spring, because if it's May rather than March, we'll have to wait 12 months probably before we can actually deliver on the outcomes that we want to see. So I would urge government to crack on and prioritise that devolution element of that levelling up bill and agenda, which is massively important to get those outcomes for my constituents, not just promises, but outcomes that we will need to show those residents who, in many cases, seats that used to be represented by Labour, who voted actually for this Prime Minister, for this Conservative government to deliver for them, they will need to see those outcomes. The mechanisms to deliver it are in the Queen's speech today, so I'd urge government to bring those forward as quickly as possible.